Hello there. We're going to be talking about some submarine terms you may not have heard before. So, here's what they mean before we mention them. Crush depth is straightforward. At this depth, the hull will be crushed. So, obviously, submarines try to stay above their crush depth. Test depth, on the other hand, is the depth the submarine is certified to be able to safely operate at or above, assuming everything is in working order and no prior damage. It is possible to go deeper than test depth for limited amounts of time, but that is the key. The clock to hull damage and eventual failure starts ticking past a boat's test depth.
Next up, trim. Trim is the balance of a submarine or ship in general between front and back as it moves through the water. A boat with extra weight up front will tend to trim down, pointing toward the seabed, and the same thing happens to the stern when extra weight is added to the back. By the way, these animations are exaggerated. Usually trim doesn't get so out of whack. Usually. Scorpion's trim got pretty gnarly in her last moments as a complete vessel. In naval parlance, the propeller is known as a screw, most likely from the obsolete term water screw, but regardless if the word screw comes up in a report, just know it's talking about propellers. Not actual screws requiring a screwdriver, though being without one is technically known as being up shit creek without a screw.
Here we have the control surfaces and stabilizers. First up, the rudder, also moving in an exaggerated way. The rudder turns the boat left or right, also known as port or starboard. We're going to stick with left and right, front and back, to keep things easy to understand for people not used to naval talk.
The stern planes move the back of the submarine up and down depending on their position. When they point up like this, they bring the back downward so the boat can decrease depth. And of course, the opposite is true. When they point down, they act on the water to move the back upward. This is useful for diving, obviously.
There is another pair up front, located on the part of the boat called the sail. These are even larger, and when the sub gets going fast enough, they actually generate lift in the water. Yes, these subs can actually fly underwater. The windows are for the Fairwater Bridge, which when underwater is full of water. It's only used on the surface.
The next term is bubble pulse. Bubble pulses are usually created by underwater explosions. It's basically one big bubble made up of the gases generated in the explosion. They expand and contract as they head for the surface, making a unique sound you'll get to hear in a few moments when we talk about sonar, which comes in two varieties, active and passive sonar. First up, active sonar. It can be thought of like a game of Marco Polo with mandatory participation by anything nearby. A sound pulse is sent out, like calling Marco, and if it hits something solid, it echoes back, just like replying polo.
Passive sonar is simply listening to what's going on in the water without making noise. Here are some examples of noises one might hear.
Killer whales having a chat. Humpback whales singing.
A motorized generator on a submarine. Now, a couple of torpedoes. The first one is battery-powered, the second, air-powered.
Kind of sounds like a vacuum cleaner.
However, the air-powered torpedo also has exhaust, which makes it sound a bit like a lawnmower.
Submarine blowing ballast tanks.
The bubble pulse. You'll hear the explosion as a rumble, and the pulse much like the torpedoes. It probably doesn't sound the way you'd imagine. Listen for the sound of a plate rotating on the floor. Here it is one more time, just the bubble pulse.
The Japanese cargo submarine I-52 being bent, crumpled, and otherwise stressed by water as her less than hydrodynamically shaped hull speeds to the sea floor. Please note, this was after she was sunk by a Avenger from U.S.S. Bogue. In the 1950s, the Navy began deploying a system known as SOSUS, groups of hydrophones, or passive sonar, at stations all over the world in order to surveil both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The idea was to listen for Soviet submarines trying to sneak up on us. Later, the system was upgraded to listen for and triangulate the splashes made by ballistic missile tests, which is pretty impressive considering how tiny one splash in a whole ocean is. Needless to say, the system worked beautifully. Well enough to tell us where U.S.S. Scorpion broke up anyway.
At least 2 stations heard Scorpion's last sounds, but we'd be willing to bet others heard them too. Likely either the stations in Nova Scotia or Bermuda.
That's enough of the technical stuff. The rest will be explained as you go. 60 and I will be around to do some skit work, but from here on out, it's gonna be the guy pulling our strings, so to speak. It's not that he loves the sound of his own voice. He just wants folks to know these are his words and he means them. Except we're obviously kidding. Without further ado, let's see what he has for us. Son of a bitch did that on purpose.
This is U.S.S. Scorpion, a skipjack-class nuclear attack submarine, and as submarines went, she was more or less the equivalent of a Lamborghini Countach. That teardrop-shaped hull is the signature of a submarine supercar. Combined with her nuclear reactor and powerful electrical motor, she could turn on a dime, accelerate like a bat out of hell, and do better than 30 knots underwater. To give you an idea of how fast that was, compare it to both past submarines and the top speed of her most modern conventional anti-submarine torpedo, the Mark 37. It topped out at about 25 knots. Hell, just looking at them, you can see one is shaped like a boat, the other like a friggin' torpedo. Don't get me wrong, Bofin and her sisters were excellent submarines for their time. Ask the Japanese, who watched millions of tons of shipping sink to the bottom thanks to American subs in World War II. It's just that they had to spend most of their time on or near the surface. Theoretically, Bofin could dive at around 9 knots and maintain that speed for less than an hour before needing to surface and recharge for several hours. Side note, 1 knot is about 1.1 miles per hour. Bofin was beholden to her ballast tanks for depth control. Scorpion had ballast tanks too, but could simply use power and her planes to fly wherever they wanted to go. It would actually be quite fair to say submarines like Scorpion, or U.S.S. Thresher here, could run rings around the submersibles of the past. For all intents and purposes, boats like Scorpion had superpowers that made them both deadly weapons and, theoretically, the safest submarines yet built. A leak that'd sink Bofin would be a mere, well, pain in the ass to Scorpion if she was operating at high speed with full use of her reactor and control surfaces, which was a good thing too, since Scorpion was badly in need of comprehensive updates and repairs. Having the ability to fly was her get out of danger fast button. So when she failed to return to port on time, it was more of a cause for puzzlement than concern. Had she encountered a target of opportunity to spy on? Was she off course? Boats were often a day or two late returning from patrol, so for the time being, the Navy sent out a message asking if all was well and waited for either a response or the boat herself to come cruising into Norfolk. Sadly, neither of those events ever happened. This is one of the last photos of Scorpion. It was taken by a sailor aboard U.S.S. Tallahatchie County AVB-2 on April 10, 1968 near Naples. Note her special two-tone paint job, lack of hull number listed anywhere or draft lines near the front. Also the enormous fairwater planes that double as a deck on the surface. May 22nd, 1968. It's about 4:10 in the afternoon, around 400 miles south-southwest of the Azores. In a few minutes, listening stations in the Canary Islands and Newfoundland will begin hearing the sounds of first her distress and then her death. The Navy would be at a loss to explain her disappearance. In the immediate aftermath, and in the absence of any hard evidence, decided she had met with an explosive of some kind, which led to flooding, followed by the ship sinking below crush depth. This is footage from when she was examined by Dr. Robert Ballard in 1986 on the same expedition he located RMS Titanic. What you're looking at is the sail, this thing, from an upside-down perspective as it rests on the bottom near the two halves of Scorpion's hull. Here we are at the front of the sail, also known as the leading edge. That open part used to be the deck access door. Meanwhile, the leading edge is noticeably bent at the bottom where it met the hull. You'll notice that except for some missing hatches and vent covers, the very front of the sub looks remarkably intact. Further back, we can see that the hull is both wrinkled and slightly bent to its left, which is our right. Around the part where it starts really looking messed up is the transition between the torpedo room and a separate watertight compartment, operations, which, as the title implies, is where they ran the boat. It's located beneath the sail and was not as, shall we say, robustly designed as the torpedo compartment. And we can even see where the sail used to be mounted. It looks like this is where the bottom of the leading edge became bent. That pipe sticking out is a hoist cylinder, a line that used to host hydraulic fluid for the torpedo compartment's loading equipment.
A hoist cylinder is seen at the top portion of the hull.
And it connected to the rest of the hydraulic system. However, this also means that the operations compartment was positioned between two reinforced compartments. The front neighbor you already know, Mr. Torpedo Room, but the compartment to the rear was... ta-da! Dr. Nuclear Reactor. Possibly the most sturdy compartment on the boat, and for good, no scratch that, very good reason. Still, in the grand scheme of things, it did put ops between a rock and a hard place, and that appears to have taken a toll because past this point, ops is missing. This is a close-up of the same area. The hole is where the leading edge of the sail used to be. The bulkhead that separated the torpedo compartment from ops was reinforced in case something exploded in the former. As a result, the bulkhead, appears to be poking out of the hull. These are ballast tank vents, and inside you can see what looks like the pressure hull.
Looking into the main ballast tank vent cover, it appears the pressure hull can be seen underneath.
A quick side note, the footage was narrated by Dr. Ballard. He does not endorse nor even know about this video. Onto the stern section, we see that it too is still very much shaped like a submarine should be, with a couple of highly obvious differences. Namely, the fact that it's broken so cleanly toward the front and the very back shoved into the hull like a telescope compressed for storage. That thing sticking up is half of the rudder. It's hard to tell, but during these shots, you can see that the rudder is off-center to the right, twisted ever so slightly. What's easier to tell is that the sub is a lot shorter than it used to be on account of the engine room being stuffed into the hull. This is the aft escape trunk, and it's open. This kind of thing tends to happen when water and or the aft compartment come through. Here is the bottom of the sail, pipes, cables, and a periscope mounts sans periscope. So naturally the question becomes, how did this happen? That's complicated, for several reasons, but not too complicated to sort out in a straightforward way. We'll start with the currently accepted, at least by most who have heard about this version of events. Naturally, it's a conspiracy theory. The conspiracy breaks down like this. In March 1968, the Soviet ballistic missile submarine K-129 sank, and U.S.S. Swordfish SSN-589 radioed in that they had a bent periscope. Clearly, at least to the conspiracy crowd, these two facts were related, and Swordfish sank K-129 either accidentally or on purpose. So in May, the Soviets sank U.S.S. Scorpion. Here's a dramatic reenactment of those scenarios.
Поршалиста, Митмейн Москау, Беларский бабушка. Уничтожь нас, товарищ. О, сухой!
Attention! All hands on deck. Prepare to prepare. Right starboard down, bubble to the port mainsail. Let's get it on. Jargon, jargon, boilerplate, and military industry terms.
Ha ha ha! Dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Not what it appears to be. Never see it coming. Hoo-ha!
Fourth quarter. Full chord press. Touchdown!
Гласност старшина балалайка.
The accidental scenario is equally ridiculous, and so please trust me when I say I can refute it with receipts. If Swordfish had looked like this when she arrived in port, I could see where the Soviets would be skeptical about a mere bent periscope. This, by the way, is U.S.S. Sargo, a Skate-class nuclear attack submarine like Swordfish. This photo was taken sometime before summer 1960 after she had a close encounter with ice. This article is about a fire. She, Sargo, spent months being repaired in dry dock. 8 years later, Swordfish was fixed in less than a day and was back on duty like nothing happened. In short, if she caused K-129 to sink based on being hit by an optical instrument, it would mean that Soviet submarines were surprisingly fragile, like built out of tin cans, borscht and hope fragile. We already know that there were no Soviet vessels within 100 miles of where Scorpion went down thanks to SOSUS, and history, which tells us that the Soviets didn't start getting serious about quiet operations until the 1970s, meaning there were no ultra-quiet phantom Soviet submarines in the area either. So, to keep the conspiracy alive just long enough to fully destroy it, let's assume that the conspiracy is correct. The Soviets somehow knew we sunk their ballistic missile sub in the Pacific and wanted vengeance. In the Atlantic Ocean, for some reason. In 1968, they only had one way to get a torpedo into the area, by air.
Ha ha ha! Лобастье блу, американский перестройка.
Con, sonar, audio transients, low-frequency cavitation noise, and high-pitched engine sounds. Torpedo? Probably.
Sonar, con, audio malfunction, error, and disbelief. No Soviet contacts for days in NATO's backyard. Listen harder!
Con, sonar, audio level increasing, range decreasing. Sounds like torpedo.
Sonar, con, no torpedoes for hundreds of miles. Need new sonar tech.
Con, sonar, also hear airplane noise.
Sonar, con, airplane, different color of horse. Turboprop?
Con, sonar, affirmative, profile suggests.
One of the ways I think this conspiracy later gained traction was as a result of the Navy's findings in the immediate aftermath. They think one of her own torpedoes sank Scorpion. While there is a non-zero chance of that very thing occurring, it assumes their crew was an incompetent bunch of numbskulls. This is what they thought happened.
Con, sonar, torpedo in the water. Sounds like it just swam out of one of our tubes.
Sonar, Con, what? Are you serious?
Con, sonar, did I stutter? A fucking torpedo was just launched by us.
Sonar, Con, watch your fucking...
Con, torpedo room, we had a hot run in number 4. We flooded the tube, and then Larson opened the outer door. The torpedo is live.
Torpedo room, Con, are you fucking kidding me?
Con, torpedo room. No joke, a live Mark 37 torpedo was just launched by Larson.
Torpedo room, Con, what were the settings on that fish?
Con, torpedo room, unknown. Book says an accidental activation could go into any mode. Be advised, once it arms, the circular run protection ends. If it is set for circle search, it'll be coming back this way.
Con, sonar, torpedo range 4.
Torpedo room, Con, how will we know it's armed and searching?
Con, sonar, possible aspect change in torpedo. It's swerving side to side.
Con, torpedo room. It'll snake back and forth, then start circling right or left.
Torpedo room, Con. I cannot fucking believe this. In December, we had a hot run on an exercise torpedo and the gang decided to fire it. By the end of the month, the entire team had been replaced. Just how the fuck does the same thing, but dumber, happen twice with 2 different groups
Con,
of fucking
sonar,
people?
Torpedo is in a...
That was the incompetent torpedo gang and pissed off Captain Get Everyone Killed, per the Navy report. Skit. It's not what I think actually happened. Remember what I said earlier about these subs being more like Lambos and the top speed of the Mark 37 torpedo? Scorpion could have flipped a 180, floored it, and the torpedo would not have had a snowball's chance on Venus of catching her. That alone makes this scenario ridiculous, but when you add in the SUBSAFE, it outright kills the notion of any torpedoes being in the area. Torpedoes are noisy in ways SUBSAFE was made to pick up. And another thing SUBSAFE would have heard if the Soviets had been involved were active sonar pings from sonar buoys. For those unfamiliar, a sonar buoy is basically a cardboard tube with a float, a sonar, and a radio. Several of them are dropped in a pattern, and together they can pinpoint where a submerged target is. This, by the way, is how they would have had to narrow down Scorpion's position no matter how accurate the information the Soviets had about her course was. Vessels can be on one side or the other of their charted course by miles. Merely dropping a torpedo in the area, set for passive homing, wouldn't do the job for 2 reasons. First, in passive mode, the Soviet AT-2 torpedo ran about as fast as the Mark 37. Scorpion could have dusted it the same way it could have dusted her own torpedo. Second, that reason I mentioned about vessels being off their track by miles. Scorpion was. That's how she ended up where she ended up. Had they dropped a torpedo on this line, it would have either found another vessel or nothing at all. The fact that SUBSAFE could and did hear Scorpion's breakup, but no signs of active sonar or heavy cavitation means there was no torpedo, period. Full stop. Cavitation, by the way, is what those bubbles behind the torpedo and Scorpion when she's going really fast are. The bubbles are actually water vapor, also known as steam and clouds. When it spins really fast, the screw, that's what you call a water propeller, creates pockets of low pressure which causes some of the water to vaporize into bubbles. Bubbles that don't last too long before being basically crushed back into liquid water. It looks cool, but it's noisy as hell. With help from SUBSAFE, in late October the wreck was located, and the Court of Inquiry reopened. They also created a couple of advisory groups to go over the photos and new data. One, the SAG, or Structural Analysis Group, noted that a potential cause, among others, was an explosion of hydrogen in the battery compartment. The batteries were lead, with sulfuric acid mixed with water as the electrolyte. When charged, hydrogen was liberated. The court acknowledged the possibility, but they were pretty sure Scorpion shot herself. A lot of people were not happy with that, and rightfully so in my opinion. As illustrated earlier, Scorpion could have easily escaped a Mark 37 torpedo. For what it's worth, though, I'm with the Navy on this one. To put it bluntly, Versance, hydrogen just doesn't have it, which is why it makes a better rocket fuel. Let's compare it to an actual high explosive used in torpedoes, RDX. Yep, this is why RDX is used in warheads and hydrogen is a rocket fuel. Hydrogen won't blow the combustion chamber apart. To make a boom loud and damaging enough to cause catastrophic flooding and a shallow channel SOSIS, to hear it, they'd have needed what scientists refer to as a shit ton of hydrogen. So much, in fact, that people would be dropping dead of suffocation or, at the very least, noticeably talking like chipmunks because hydrogen ups vocal pitch just like helium. Luckily, Scorpion wasn't relying on batteries, so while sulfuric acid and hydrogen explosion are deadly sounding words, here's what happens if it occurred while Scorpion's power plant was active.
Holy shit, what was that?
Hydrogen explosion. Several batteries have been broken open and sulfuric acid is everywhere. Better surface quick.
All ahead, flank. Full rise on Fairwater Plains. Put us on the surface 2 minutes ago.
That remark about her being a supercar all depended on her reactor/power plant being online. It was the heart of what let her do the things she was capable of doing. As long as it and the electric motor were functioning, she could literally fly through the water. When I think about how a superpowered submarine can end up in 3 chunks on the ocean floor, 2 things come to mind as part of the initiating sequence.
You know, this is really more of an adventure than an actual job.
First, a flooding casualty, which is Navy talk for water filling a space it shouldn't be, somewhere in the engine room. Doesn't need to be a hole in the hull either. Could have been as simple as a leak in the high-pressure seawater system or even the drive shaft connection. Second, the loss of the motor due to electrical shorts, and with it, the boat's ability to move under her own power. In this scenario, the reactor becomes pretty much irrelevant. With no way to transfer the energy it creates to the sea, it's just a really good battery. Please note, I've sped things up here so time passes a tad faster. To be clear, the following is not the only way this could have happened. The flood begins now, and there. The motor and/or controls have been shorted out, and the boat coasts for a bit. The loss of speed and increased weight in the rear means she trims down by the butt. They try to regain trim with control surfaces and standard ballast tank adjustments. The rate of water ingress has begun to increase rapidly as their depth increases. By now, they are out of options to stop this sudden elevator ride to watery death, except for the emergency brake. An emergency main ballast tank blow, EMBT for short. It's what happens when all the air banks are opened at once to push water as quickly as possible out of the ballast tanks. When they need it most, and where it should have been able to save the boat, the system fails in a way I'll talk about later. At this point, they are literally out of options, so they close the watertight doors and wait for the end. 91 seconds after the EMBT attempt, the ops compartment fails and the air comes out of this periscope mast. It's missing the upper fairing, deplumer, and, well, the periscope itself, which to me says,
This thing turned into an impromptu escape pathway for gas.
And given the depth involved, speed at which pressure equalizes, and force exerted, it's no surprise that this would be the first event where a bubble pulse was detected. Less than a minute later, the back part of the engine room was shoved forward into the forward part. Because of physics, namely the spin induced by making something already spinning shorter and the position of the planes, she goes into a tumble. She had 2 hydraulic pumps toward the very back of the engine room. When that part of the boat gets smushed forward, both lines are cut. Soon the planes will be moving freely. The screw and shaft get extruded as the flip causes her to slow down. Note, the back part is not as far inside here as it appears on the seabed yet. Also note, the crunch didn't happen in a perfectly straight line. The back portion twisted to the right, flicking the entire hull in that direction like a whip. Ops, already being full of water and not reinforced, gets bent to the left, along with the front of the boat. At this point, the bulkhead between ops and the torpedo room is warped enough to let water in, and the entire submarine becomes flooded. She comes down on her stern, and the already partially telescoped engine room acts like a giant shock absorber. The back is stuffed even further into the hull, and at the same time, operations pays the price for being between two reinforced compartments. When the reactor compartment stops, ops, carried by inertia and momentum, begins to crumple into it like a beer can as the torpedo compartment crumples ops from above. In the process, the sail is pinched at the leading edge and broken off. It falls also to the left and takes a good chunk of the hull surrounding what used to be ops on that side with it. The broken hull piece comes down first and the sail ends up right on top of it. You can see some of the hull in this photograph I showed before, that black wrinkled thing it's resting on. That bite out of the back of the sail probably happened in the collapse. Meanwhile, the front lands on a somewhat even keel and the aft section collapses to the seabed, making a pretty big crater toward the front and burying parts of the back control surfaces. In between them, debris from the smashed ops compartment. I am not the only person who thinks a scenario like this is what went down. Sublin, the guy in charge of submarines in the Atlantic Ocean, put forward a similar theory that was disregarded by the Court of Inquiry. And I think I know why. Just over 5 years earlier, a similar misfortune befell U.S.S. Thresher SSN-589. Her loss prompted a program called SUBSAFE, meant to make future submarines safer by design and to have current submarines retrofitted with better safety systems. She too suffered a flooding casualty, and well, here's what happened in a nutshell.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
April 10th, 1963. U.S.S. Thresher is conducting deep dive tests while being monitored by U.S.S. Skylark ASR-20. Around 10 after 9, Thresher reports that they are having, quote, minor difficulties, unquote. They have positive up angle, which means the front is pointed toward the surface and are attempting to, quote, blow up, unquote. And it's not working. They will keep Skylark advised. The captain of Skylark hears this and proceeds to grab the hand mic away from the guy using it. He has a question that needs answering right now. Are you in control? Besides being an obviously stupid question, he manages to ask it over the reports coming in from Thresher. As a result, only parts of her following messages were heard, and then a loud implosion with a distinct bubble pulse. The sonar operator had been doing his job since World War II and knew what that sound meant. He tells the captain that it sounds like Thresher broke up, and the captain, respecting his subordinate's experience, nods solemnly. Just kidding! Captain Dumb question doubled, tripled, and finally quadrupled. Down on doing dumb shit. First, he disregarded the sonar dude's correct observation. Second, he ignored another subordinate's suggestion they inform Sublin. Third, he spent over an hour requesting status checks from Thresher and dropping signal grenades indicating she should surface. When he finally did decide it was time to tell the higher-ups, the message he sent was basically, haven't heard from Thresher for a while now, she's missing or something, I guess. In the subsequent court of inquiry, it was determined that Thresher had suffered a flooding casualty near test depth. They aren't sure just where the flooding happened, but they are sure that the reactor's coolant pumps went from high speed to low speed. They were remotely monitored. This likely means one of two basic scenarios occurred. Either the reactor was shut down, or the motor stopped drawing current and the reactor switched into low power mode to avoid overheating the core. In low power mode, it only needed low speed pumping to remove residual decay heat. When she tried to use an EMBT to get back to the surface, condensation in the air pipes was frozen. After a couple of minutes, ice completely choked the lines before enough water was pushed out. See, releasing compressed air is what's known as an endothermic process. It absorbs heat from the environment, and the more pressure the air is under, the more heat it absorbs. The SUBSAFE program put the Navy in something of a bind. They knew they were operating potentially dangerous subs. The ice issue was something all existing blow systems were vulnerable to. But they were also in the middle of a Cold War with the Soviet Union, and the ocean was one of the biggest battlefields in a World War III scenario. So taking every nuclear sub out of action for the next few years was simply out of the question. The answer was a compromise, and like most compromises, it didn't work. Scorpion had not been refitted to SUBSAFE standards, and even worse than that, her EMBT system had been modified with an interim system, a system they decided sucked. So they unplugged it and decided Scorpion didn't really need an EMBT system at all, considering she would only be operating in shallow water until she could be made SUBSAFE, which is a bit like deciding it's safe to drive without a seatbelt as long as you don't go far. Spoiler alert, it's not safe to do that. Submarines have several different air systems for different purposes. The low pressure system was about 225 psi. It was used for things like air tools. For blowing main ballast tanks and impulsing World War II torpedoes out of the tube, there was a 600 psi air system. Both of them were supplied by the boat's main high-pressure system, operating at 3,000 psi, with pressure reduction valves to step the pressure down to either 225 or 600 psi. I'd be willing to bet that someone got the bright idea to route the 3,000 psi air directly into the ballast system. In theory, and without more technical knowledge, that sounds like a really good idea. More pressure means more air. More air under high pressure means more water gets pushed out, faster. How can you lose? Several ways, actually. First, that cooling process ramps up with more released pressurized air. What took minutes on Thresher could theoretically happen in a couple dozen seconds. I said that first, by the way, because the clogging problem is what the whole thing was trying to solve in the first place. Making it happen faster seems a bit counterproductive. Second, running air at high pressure into a system designed for lower pressure is never a good idea, unless you're looking to make a pretty loud boom and break some stuff. Third, when it didn't work, they simply disabled the entire system. Point number 48, there is a prime example of what they call denial. Scorpion sank, that much is clear. One of the ways she was supposed to have at her disposal in order to prevent that was an EMBT system. So, saying the fact that she apparently did not have one when she sank, and that fact didn't contribute to her loss, is a bit rich. Imagine if they said the same kind of thing after a different kind of accident.
Fire in engines 1 and 2. Warning.
On fire! Punching out!
Apology. The system you have attempted to activate, eject, has been disabled for your safety.
Well, shit.
Okay, basically, it boils down to this. The fact that the ejection system of the aircraft was tagged out inoperative before flight had nothing to do with the death of Commander Derek Faceplant Domino. The canopy opened and closed just fine, so Commander Faceplant could have simply chosen to bail out the old-fashioned way.
By the way, this crash footage isn't being played as disaster porn. The Soviet Tu-16 Badger that crashed while buzzing U.S.S. Essex and the F-100 Sabre Dance that killed First Lieutenant Barty Brooks are both to illustrate points. The Badger is simply an example of Cold War accidents that occurred on a surprisingly frequent basis. The Soviets didn't shoot down an American plane in reprisal for this. So, assuming they'd start taking vengeance for the unexplained disappearance of K-129 is a tad ridiculous. Lieutenant Brooks's crash is put here as an example of a service member doing his job without the benefit of a safety system to cover this kind of accident. He had an early model ejection seat designed for use at higher altitude and speed. If he'd have punched out, he'd have simply died when the ejection seat hit the ground before the chute could open. Imagine if he had had a 0-0 ejection seat, one usable at 0 altitude and speed like the one in this F-35, and it had been tagged out like Scorpion's EMBT system had. Then imagine the Air Force had the gall to put a line like, "He still could have bailed out manually" in the incident report. Well, you don't have to imagine. In the Navy's case, they said their sub was totally safe, even though it had no emergency recovery system. The kicker is tragic. The problem Thresher had was caused by how deep she happened to be when shit hit the fan. Down around 1,000 feet, it takes a lot more air to push water out of the main ballast tanks on account of the high water pressure down there. So in order to work, Thresher had to leave the air on for a long time. Long enough for ice to choke up the system. Scorpion was around 500 feet when her EMBT attempt failed. To me, it seems logical that the reason the attempt occurred at 500 feet instead of when the boat was shallower was the time it took to try to reconnect the EMBT system. Under time pressure and other issues, they hooked it up as best as they could. When they pushed the button, the reason the whole contraption was a bad idea came true with a fantastic bang. A bang loud enough to be heard in Argentia, Newfoundland, and a SOSUS base there that was set up to listen for shallow noises going into Hudson Bay. In other words, it was listening the other way and still heard the sound. See, there are two basic ways to make a very loud noise with a submarine. First, have it shoot something with a torpedo. The explosions caused are very, very loud. The second way is far less well known and has to do with what happens when high-pressure air defeats valves, air banks, and plumbing in the ballast tank system. It's a lot like popping a balloon, only instead of plastic, it's steel, aluminum, and other metals. And instead of a low-pressure party balloon, it's between 600 and 3,000 psi. Essentially, the sound could best be described as a steel balloon being overinflated almost instantaneously. The Navy says it would take at least 30 pounds of high explosive to make a noise that loud. Seems like several thousand pounds of air under pressure could be of equal or greater violence. Her speed allowed her to survive incredible leaks. Note that she was capable of recovering from a leak producing 16 inches of water a second at 20 knots. That's over a foot of water in 1 second. I don't know about you all, but the room I'm in would be full in about 7 seconds at that rate. Fun fact, a cubic yard of water weighs more than 1,500 pounds, so in less than 10 seconds you're talking tons of seawater weighing the boat down. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying she suffered a leak that bad. In fact, I think it was probably something less dramatic over a longer period of time. The point is, with her reactor and engines working, she could power her way out of trouble, especially at depths above 500 feet. The fact that she didn't power out of whatever happened pretty much screams that she simply couldn't. When the crew saw depth increasing faster than blowing ballast with the normal system could handle, I think they did what most of us would do in that situation. You try to fix the fucking EMBT system. Try like our lives depended on it. Because in that situation, they most definitely would. I don't have specifics on Scorpion's air systems to suggest exactly where a failure occurred. However, mixing in high-pressure compressed air with moderately compressed air put the EMBT system in a situation where overpressure events could have happened anywhere downstream of the high-pressure connection. The irony is that the Navy was doing their best to balance Cold War needs and the safety of its crews. They didn't put the failed interim EMBT system into Scorpion because they wanted to make sure she'd be screwed if things went south. The idea was exactly the opposite. They say the road to hell is paved with the best of intentions, and they're right in this case. People like to paint the Navy of 1968 as being out to cover their asses to avoid bad press, and while that is certainly a possibility, I like to think of the folks who wrote this report as simply being unable to cope with the loss of another submarine full of men, at least partially due to the damn EMBT system. It's worth noting again that she was not SUBSAFE certified because, no, American SUBSAFE certified submarine has been lost at sea since, and that's not hyperbole, it's just a simple fact. Check out U.S.S. San Francisco here. She crashed into an undersea mountain head on going pretty fast. She was also designed to be SUBSAFE from the start, and this crash is a testament to how well the program works. If either Thresher or Scorpion had had a similar meeting with a mountain, they would not have survived. Anyway, to the Navy, I have only one thing to say. The bottom line is both simple and sad. Deploying Scorpion without a functional EMBT system was just like sending out a booze cruise without life jackets. Sure, life jackets don't guarantee survival, and neither would an EMBT system, but they provide a much stronger chance of survival in the face of an emergency than nothing at all. What would you do if you found yourself on a sinking boat with a damaged life jacket? Me? I'd try to fix it any way I could. And when their boat started sinking, I expect the crew of Scorpion tried to fix their life jacket. Had it been functional, it just might have saved 99 lives. As for the Soviet secret kill conspiracy bullshit, I can hear the thoughts of several conspiracy lovers, and they're all shouting about Project Azorian, the not-so-secret CIA effort to recover K-129 from the bottom in the mid-1970s. The thing about that is, it's a stupid conspiracy. Why would the U.S. set out to sink an already obsolete Golf II class with old missiles? And even more importantly, recovery had been the goal from the start anyway. Why pick a place 16,000 fucking feet deep? So deep it guarantees the sub itself is going to be battered and crushed beyond recognition. The simple fact is, SOSUS told us where K-129 bit the dust, and the CIA said, hey, there's encryption gear and communications intelligence down there. Let's get it. On the Soviet side, things get even dumber. Why pick a random nuclear attack boat in another ocean? Seems like if Swordfish was the culprit, they'd have gone after her. Or the more likely option they would have exercised if they were out for reciprocity, sinking an American ballistic missile sub. That's what K-129 was, part of their strategic defense system. To their line of thinking at the time, that would have been the big deal. In that case, we'd be talking about U.S.S. Robert E. Lee or another boomer that mysteriously sank in the Pacific. Side note, that's right, we had a ballistic missile sub named after the coach of the losing team in our country's Civil War. Bet he never gets another named ship in the United States Navy ever again. Anyway, the point is, the conspiracy is dumb on all sides. Very, very dumb. I am not saying that my version is the only version that could have happened. I'm saying that given the facts, physics, and history, it simply makes the most sense to me. If you want to believe the Soviets peered into the future, saw K-129 being raised, and decided to sink a random American sub, be my guest. Same goes to the camp who think the Soviets were pissed off Scorpion was spying on their operations like all NATO subs did. Just don't expect people who can think critically and have some basic knowledge of the related subjects to believe it too. If you want to believe the fresh torpedo gang on Scorpion decided the best way to handle a hot-running torpedo armed with a live warhead was to fire it, again, that's up to you. I'd simply ask, why do you think they were so dumb that they were hit by a torpedo with a top speed slower than their boat? And point out one crucial fact about the torpedo in question. It could only arm itself moving through open water, traveling above a certain speed, which caused a switch on one of the fins to be pushed into arming position. Inside the tube, the torpedo isn't running through water, so the switch doesn't actually get switched. Theoretically, if they'd simply left the torpedo alone, the absolute worst-case scenario was a low-order detonation in the tube caused by heat. Which, while it would have definitely put the boat in dry dock, it wouldn't have sunk her either. Remember that fire I seemingly mentioned out of nowhere while talking about Swordfish's sister ship, U.S.S. Sargo? That wasn't just an unrelated bit of trivia. 2 Mark 37 warheads exploded in said blaze, located within the aft torpedo compartment, and it didn't leak. But anyway, like I said, believe what you want. The goal here is to explore other, more reasonable potential causes for U.S.S. Scorpion to have sunk. Not being SUBSAFE and not having an EMBT system are major red flags usually ignored. So that's basically it. Scorpion was deprived of her superpower, either reactor or electrical motor, by a flood when water shorted the controls. The flow rate was greater than pumps or the normal ballast system could handle, and instead of accepting death quietly, the crew tried to save their own lives by reactivating the inoperable EMBT system. It failed loudly and the boat sank to crush depth. As for Project Azorian and K-129, that's a subject for a different video.